So most welcome to our next episode. Today we have two outstandingly analytical and two outstanding people on the session today, and it's an important issue. There has been lots of things that are being said because state of affairs, the session that it's named, uh, uh, it just caters to the issues that come out in with the passage of time. So today we are going to talk about Indo-Pacific and India-China relations, and then U.S. withdrawal from the Afghanistan. I hope that we'll go through three sections. First, we'll try to cater with the India-China relations post-Galwan specifically. We have two important guests, Mr. Sushant Sareen. He's a foreign policy analyst and national security analyst. And then we have Mr. Abhijit Iyer-Mitra. He's a defense and strategic expert. So I'll start with this thing that post Galwan, lots of water has flown beneath this bridge. Lots of things have happened between India and China. De-escalation has it's a gone thing now, but there are certain speculations that China is yet on the borders at some places. That having been said, we still where we are after a year post Galwan. That's an important thing to talk about. I would like to invite Mr. Sushant Sareen to open it up for us. Especially he'll deal with the post Galwan India-China relations in a year. What has happened? What are the things that are important to it, to the bilateral relations, and to the security of India? He'll open it up for us. So, Mr. Sushant Sareen, the podium is all yours.
So, Miraj, as far as I can see, in a manner of speaking, what happened in Galwan was something very good because it disabused us, of a certain image that we had of China, that we can do business with China without strengthening our own self. The way we were pursuing our interests with China, that was something that would eventually lead to a stable state solution. There were many of us who were very skeptical about it and who would often say that even the so-called CBMs that we had worked out were very accident prone, and accident happened. And the accident, actually, it wasn't even an accident. It was a premeditated action by the Chinese, as had been happening in the past. But this time, there was a pushback from our side. Since Doklam, we should have expected something like this will happen. So at least to the extent that it has been a rude shock and it has woken us up, I think what happened in Galwan was good. And I say this, a lot of people will start taking umbrage, and I certainly don't mean that Indian soldiers dying was a good thing, but purely from a strategic political angle, I think it was it was a rude, but a very welcome wake-up call for us. Now, since then, have we done everything that we should do or we should have done? And I am not entirely sure on that. I think one thing is very clear: the relationship between India and China is seriously strained. And what has happened is that some of the reluctance which we had in looking for, ways to balance China, I think some of that reluctance has dissipated, but it has not entirely gone. And I can understand why it has not entirely gone, because somewhere along the line, I think there are still some lingering suspicions on how the Quad will operate, how the Indo-Pacific strategy will operate, whether we will become a tool in it or we will become an integral part of it. So I think those are still somewhat unsettled questions. But one thing is very clear, that we are now looking at balancing as an option. Where we seem to be faltering and we seem to have faltered is that apart from the fact that we kind of banned Chinese apps. We have stopped Chinese investments in certain sectors. We have now started cracking down on use of Chinese equipment or Chinese involvement in critical infrastructure. Uh, Apart from that, I think the way we should have gone about decoupling hasn't been done. So as a result, if you look at the trade figures, they still are pretty high. We still seem to be importing a lot more from the Chinese than we were. Uh, and I think that is going to ultimately lead to the failure of any other strategy that you're going to be making out. And this is an opportunity, both because of what happened in Galwan as well as what is happening in the rest of the Indo-Pacific, for India to try and attract investments in India, to try and not entirely, but to the extent it is possible, emerge as an alternative production destination for stuff which was being made in China. But we do not seem to have risen up to that task, because that requires very serious internal reform in terms of regulatory practices, in terms of procedures, in terms of how the bureaucracy and the powers that be look at business. If you look at business as a milch cow or a kamdhenu cow that you can keep extracting from it without putting anything back in it, then I think we've lost the plot. So I think we really need to move in that direction, because with economy will come the kind of heft and the kind of resources that we seriously need, and the technology that we seriously need for our military modernization also. So, just getting a rude wake up call is not enough. I think a lot of the other stuff which we had to do has either not been done or is still a work in progress.
Thank you, Mr. Sushant Sareen, for your initial remarks on that. Now that we have seen that at the political level, and there is a general consensus across the country that yes, against China, it has to step up its approach, and then it has to pull its socks, so that in the future there must be something that we will at least balance or rebalance things. So, to Mr. Abhijit, will you please take us to this thing that at the defense level, always we have the bilateral trade was always in favor of China before Galwan. After that, it was after the ban on the Chinese apps and other things. How is it post Galwan? I mean, since 1 year has passed, how are our preparations?
Look, nothing's really changed. In India, nothing ever really changes. If we go through different processes, this is like there was Nehru 1.0, now we're living through Nehru 2.0. So, it's socialism with a vengeance, non-alignment with a vengeance, self-reliance with a vengeance. The names have changed, now it's called something else. It's called Atmanirbhar Bharat. It's called Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, but in effect, it's the same thing Lenin and Stalin did, just not as competently as Lenin and Stalin did. Remember, they were much better at what they did than we ever have been. So it's even in defense, nothing has really changed. Because see, for something to change, first your thinking has to change. Just putting troops on the border is not a change. Putting tanks on the border is not a change. Yes, putting infrastructure on the border does show to some extent that the thinking has changed. And that is probably the only thing that we've actually seen change under this government. This movement from, a ground-centric, an army-centric way of thinking about war to an air-centric thinking, Air Force-based war thinking. Why is that important? Because when you build infrastructure and roads on your border, air planners and ground planners think very differently. The ground planner thinks, this is very scary. I have just built a highway for the Chinese to invade me through. So I have given the Chinese a highway to invade me. An air planner thinks of it very differently. An air planner says, yay, I've created this little road where all their tanks will come and I will take them out one by one by one by one. So what is a threat for a ground planner becomes a opportunity for an air planner. So that is one thing we've seen, and we started seeing that from Balakot, because Balakot was the first time, we used the Air Force for retaliation rather than the army. So that is a significant change in thinking. Now, the question is, you may have changed the type of force you're deploying, but have you changed all the infrastructure and things like that that goes along with that, which has not changed?
When it comes to infrastructure, see, India and China, when it comes to maritime policy, India and China simultaneously started an initiative. Then it was initially called the Sagarmala. Then it became under the Vajpayee's government, and then came UPA. It was named and abruptly, terminated altogether. Came maritime, policy. Then came again NDA. Again, it was disrupted, and now it became a Sagarmala 2.1 or 2.0. So, infrastructure-wise, Mr. Sushant Sareen, where do we stand? What are the basic things that actually put us always on the back seat? When it comes to infrastructure, do we lack sort of integration or within our manufacturing sector? Do we lack administrative quality? Do we lack administrative acumen? So that we could achieve, at least, we must not be sitting like ducks. It doesn't work that way. Mr. Sushant Sareen.
Yeah, it doesn't work that way, but that is the way we try and do things. We believe in jugaad more than anything else. See, which is why there is no real forward planning. I'll give you an example. I stay in Gurgaon. An expressway was built some years back between Delhi and Gurgaon. Now, the expressway, after it was built, the capacity of the road was already an under capacity compared to the volume of traffic. So we were not planning 20, 30, 40 years ahead. We were planning to fulfill a gap that existed 10 years ago. Okay, so this is one problem in the way we do our infrastructure planning. Now, there is some merit in that, that you don't have the kind of overcapacity or the ghost cities which you have, for example, in China. So, one could rationalize it in that sense. But if you look at it from another point of view, this is a problem which afflicts us in virtually everything we do. That is one. The other problem is in terms of the time taken to take decisions. Okay, you narrow down on a particular aircraft, and then you take 20 years to actually place an order. How does defense planning, how does any planning work like this? It's the same thing with infrastructure projects which we undertake. And then what we tend to do is we place minefields at every stage of an infrastructure project. And one of the worst things which happened was there was nothing wrong in what they did, but the way it was done and some of the clauses that were put in the bills which the UPA government made towards the fag end of their tenure. As a result of which, number one, your infrastructure costs go up tremendously. I'm sure some other costing model, some other pricing model could have been worked out. After all, if you're going to take land away from somebody or somebody's productive asset away from somebody, you must pay him adequate compensation. No quibbles on that count. But could you have figured it out slightly differently? Did you have to place the kind of minefields that you placed in those particular laws? And why were those laws brought in? Because the then regime was caught with its hands in the till, because they were doing all kinds of shady deals by, especially in the state I come from now, Haryana, where all kinds of shady deals were done to shortchange the farmer, grab his land, and then sell it off dirt cheap to cronies. Now, once the criticism starts for that, what you start doing is that you put in a minefield in terms of the new land regulations and other stuff which you did. How do you then develop infrastructure in the light of those laws? So I think there needs to be a certain clarity. There needs to be a certain kind of thinking on how we need to move forward, at least in the economic domain, and not commit the kind of mistakes we have been making over the last 50, 60 years.
And that's fair enough. That's fair enough, because if we see that India, all it needed in 2014 was a political will, though earlier prime ministers or their dispensations, they used to have it. But then we are facing a very, very, very basic issue of too much of administrative things or too much of administrative activism in it. Mr. Abhijit, if you can throw some light on first, on the issue of power asymmetry between India and China. B, does our administrative setup need an immediate overhaul? Reason being that it will pull us down onto the high table of geopolitics, our national security, our other issues that are related to it.
So look, I'll answer the second question first because it's basically carrying on from Sushant. The problem in India is the ability to disrupt or rather stall decision making is democratized. All right, every single babu from director to deputy secretary to undersecretary level can stall a project with one mere note on the side of a file. But the ability to push things through is extremely limited. It resides at the very top, and then you have to take the command responsibility for vetoing all the other objections on the paperwork. Now, in that, you don't know. See, the problem here is a lot of the objections themselves are purchased. So when you overrule a decision, you don't know if you've accidentally given into corruption or not. So it's a very dangerous thing. The stacks against you for approving a decision are too much. The cost of not approving a decision is very little. And the punishment for getting caught for not approving a decision for consideration is non-existent. Because remember, there's that famous Supreme Court judgment. It's the bribe giver who's guilty, not the bribe taker, right? So you have this whole administrative setup which does not work, and it's a generalist administrative structure. Now, where does this play in terms of infrastructure? See, the problem with infrastructure is that when you have a generalist administrative structure, in addition to being prone to blockages, what happens is you're not paying attention to the economy of infrastructure. Remember, infrastructure by itself does not generate anything. You need infrastructure, you need a business environment, you need all sorts of other things. There's 4 factors of production. You need all of them to generate economic activity around infrastructure. Now, I remember when Rajiv Gandhi first won Amethi, or the second time rather, after he became prime minister, they started up a whole range of industries in Amethi. You go there today, it's completely deindustrialized. Why? Because none of them were economically viable, right? So there's a whole pattern about this, be it socialism, being economically clueless, the power differential between the bureaucrats itself, the ability to block things, all of this come together in terms of how India does not perform. Now, for India, going to your first question, which is the power differential between India and China, the power differential there, when people say India can be a competitor to China, it is like if, I don't know, if Sri Lanka or Bangladesh came and said that they are going to be a competitor to India. It's a joke. China is an industrialized country. India is not. We're a pre-industrial agrarian country. We in this country especially, we love laughing at the Pakistanis saying they're going to take us on. We're like, what are you? Who are you? Why are you? But then with completely straight face, we say we're going to take on China. Understand, the only thing that is propping you up against China right now is Western arms. Okay, because the ability of Western arms to bring disproportionate effects onto a battlefield, and we don't even use them properly, that's a different matter. the sophistication of their equipment is what gives you a quality edge over China's quantity. The problem is if you've got this kind of a quality advantage over China, China's quality is also improving and its quantity is improving. So it catches up to you or gets better than you very, very quickly. So even there are huge issues. But ultimately, remember, your military equipment may be better, but if your economy can't absorb shocks, if you're not able to deal with things, if you don't have the kind of reserves that China has, the kind of sheer industrial power that China has, the domestication of the factors of war that China has, you're not going to be able to do much. Even in terms of foreign policy, you look at it. Our foreign service, there was a lot of talk 4 or 5 years back on expanding the foreign service, We've actually reduced the size of the foreign service. We've gone from 700 odd to 600 odd. In terms of Singapore has a bigger foreign service than India does. That should tell you a lot. Now, why is a foreign service important? Because it's all about gathering primary information. It's an intelligence arm. Okay, it's like having a permanent trade representative in, say, New York and San Francisco and things like that, who can constantly be talking to people and sending back information back to Delhi. We don't do that. It's very rare, very far between. The bureaucrats aren't properly trained. Your diplomats aren't properly trained. Even the archiving systems, they all write it down in files and things. They're published, printed, put in the basement. If you have to refer to it, there's no collation. It has to be sent up. It takes 3 days to come up. By that time, your decisions are, God knows what kind of inputs have gone in there. The third aspect of this is the way Indians think about policy. We're all about jhatka policy. Okay? So we decide policy has happened here. We don't think through what are the second order effects, what are the third order effects of policy. Case in point, GST. Case in point, demonetization. Case in point, Kashmir. All right, now it's back to circle one with all of these. Black money is alive and kicking. Extortion, low-level extortion, which we thought was over and gone with the end of License Raj with Narasimha Rao, is back again with a boom. Because every low-level fellow, there's a mutual friend of ours called Yusuf Unjhawala, who runs a thing out of Bangalore. He's being persecuted every single day by these tax collectors. Okay, so there's never any thought given to what happens. Jo abhi ho raha hai, here and now, that is all we think about. What happens afterwards, we don't think about. And by the way, it's across the board. I've been to several nuclear discussions. I think Sushant was with me in Israel as well. The depth with which they think through things is amazing. The lack of depth with which we never think through things and think we're being extremely profound is also equally amazing.
It's scientific, sir. Actually,
basically, listen, the world has changed and we have not been changing along with it. So all our systems, especially our decision-making systems, our bureaucratic systems, are all very, I wouldn't even say 20th century, I would say very 19th century. So that is one problem. The second problem is that, in terms of the processes and procedures which we need to make, especially in the economic field, so that, the business, that if I want to start a business tomorrow, I don't have to look over my shoulder whether I can start it tomorrow or not. And I always say this, that in this country, anybody who does business, anybody who does a manufacturing business even more, deserves a Bharat Ratna. Because the amount of, restrictions, shackles, regulations, mindless laws that we have put on the productive part of our society is astounding. And then we hope to compete with China. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. And so I think we really need to, get our systems in place, because this kind of petty corruption, at one level, it might not hurt somebody, or somebody comes every second day, a hafta leke chale jata hai. At one level, it doesn't really, hurt somebody. But at another level, it's the most destructive thing you can ever do. That every businessman is subjected to this kind of extortion. And simply because the guy who is in charge, like this case of Yusuf, which Abhijit is talking about, he just has to make a declaration. KG, these products are not according to what has been described. Later on, his decision can be overturned. But look at the cost of challenging that decision, which the businessman will have to pay. And then you expect him to do business properly here. It doesn't work that way.
I mean, we'll come to that, about how too much of administrative activism, I'll say, into the things will pull
Yeah,
us.
this is not activism. This is extortionism. This is not activism.
Go to that extent, but then let it be. See, the most of the future, geopolitics will be, Indo-Pacific centric. Reason being that all the big powers except UK and except one or two other powers from Europe are involved into the Indo-Pacific. So it will be more a maritime driven. We'll come to that later into the Indo-Pacific section. But what will be the trajectory between India and China, the relations between them, especially since last year? One last thing about it, Mr. Sushant Sareen, how is the trajectory going to get to it?
Yeah, it's difficult to predict how the trajectory will go. I think it's not dependent only upon us. I think it will depend a lot on how the US policy ultimately works out. The Americans are going to be the top dogs in this, along with the Chinese. Are we going to see, at least on the face of it, it looks that this contestation is only going to gather further pace. And you could be looking at some kind of a Cold War 2.0 in not too distant a future. Some of it we are already seeing. But then how do the alignments take place? How does this particular Cold War play itself out? If at all there is going to be a Cold War, will the Americans decide that it might be better for them to gracefully accept the fact that an upstart country is going to replace them as the top country in the world? Will they accept that fact, or will they challenge that fact? If you look at some of the so-called thinkers in the US, they are still of the view that China needs to be accommodated. There is another view which is quite strident and probably on the ascendant at this point in time, which is that no, China needs to be cut to size. So we don't know how that debate is going to play itself out in the United States, because the Chinese have made very deep inroads into the American system as well. We don't know what the reactions of many of the other countries will be, because many other countries in the Indo-Pacific are right now hedging their bets. 20 years back, they might have gone blindly with the US. Today, I'm not sure how many of them will be ready to go with the US at the risk of offending China. So, there are a lot of balls in the air, and we don't know how they are going to drop anytime soon.
Mr. Abhijit, your thoughts on the trajectory that may, what will be the state of
trajectory is going to be no different than what it is today. Okay. Why? Because you need knowledge power, you need economic power to get to be a peer competitor. We have neither. Let's be very clear about this. We're not in a position to even go there. So for example, to require your population, to educate your population, to get to the level of a factory floor workforce. I'm not even talking about Bill Gates kind of, IT super tech. You need about $500 billion a year in your education budget. You're spending 20 billion. Out of that, about 8 to 12 billion dollars is private. So it's only going to that top 0.02% right on top. For $8 billion, if you think you can substitute for a $500 billion education budget, which you should be having to compete with China, you're not going to get there. So there's a fundamental ways and means issue. Okay, so you don't have the education to get there. You don't have the industrial part to get there, because you're doubling down on socialism. You're not allowing businesses to grow. Now, if you don't have knowledge and you don't have wealth, how are you going to get powerful? See, power is the sum of knowledge and wealth. Okay, everything else comes from there. If you're not going to do that, you are not fit to be a peer competitor. You are not going to become a peer competitor. I can show you all the statistics. There's absolutely nothing to show we'll be ever be able to compete with China in my lifetime, at least. Probably not in yours either. So we can have all these daydreams, but in reality, India will be a footnote in the history of the Quad or in any maritime grouping. At best, we will have some glorious actions here or there once in 50 years. And that's about it. Baki, nothing is going to happen. It will continue like this. China will continue on an upwards path. America will continue on a slightly downwards path, though even China's upward path is very limited. Remember, in spite of their economic growth, they've been restricted to a $10,000 per capita income, middle income economy for quite some time now. Because they are not able to, in order to become a true information age economy, you need to democratize. If you're not democratizing, you can't go there. In America, we're seeing the opposite, that they were a democracy, but right now the entire woke terror that's going on there, it's crushing academic freedom. It's bringing down the level of scientific knowledge. It's bringing down the level of all kinds of knowledge out there. So if China is stuck because of authoritarianism, that it is not able to go up, then America is now stuck in the midst of a cultural revolution, just like what China went through under Mao Zedong, which is slowly bringing it down. So the future doesn't look very good. Either way, it's either authoritarianism of one kind or authoritarianism of another kind.
No, but the one part where I'll slightly disagree with Abhijit, I agree that, you know, this woke terrorism which is happening in the US is actually is a major drag on American innovation, on American power, a lot of things. But I think, America and countries like that have gone through these kind of paroxysms in the past as well. This is not the first time something like this is happening. So if you look at what happened in the late 60s, early 70s, those movements are at that point of time. If you judge those movements from, what was the ruling paradigm of those times, those are pretty radical. In many ways, as radical as what this political correctness nonsense is happening right now. In many ways, they were as much let us say, intellectual terrorism of this element in those days as it is right now. The thing is that many of these societies have also self-correcting mechanism. When things like this reach a certain level, I think there's also a pushback, there is also a correction, there's also some kind of accommodation, and you start moving forward. I don't see that happen in a country like China because it's all top down. All the diktats are coming from top down. So to that extent, I would probably have a little more confidence on the Americans being able to get their act together than I would in the Chinese being able to continue along the same trajectory. But I don't know if Abhijit agrees with me.
So I would generally agree that normally we've seen self-correction happen. So for example, there was McCarthyism, which was something very similar in the United States between 47 to 54. It self-corrected and, it went away and nobody wants to talk about it anymore. The problem here is that far from going away, there's been a full-blown institutional capture. It's taken 15 to 20 years to execute it, but their control now over every aspect of the validation mechanism for this new cultural revolution, be it academia, be it academic output, be it government, be it even the military, surprise, surprise, the control is now absolute. So the avenues for dissent, the avenues for self-correction are now non-existent for America. So there is no coming back from the precipice on this anymore. Short of a civil war, the problem is because the military is also going to into this entire cultural milieu or at least is being forced into it, I don't know. What's happening is that, even if you do end up having civil war, it's not going to be a civil war. It's going to be more civil strife between the right and the left in America. And it is a strife that the right will lose, because the entire narrative capture that has happened, the institution capture that has happened, belongs now to the left that is imposing this new ideology. Till the left itself decides to shut it down, which it won't. Because remember, the one thing that has been very, very carefully avoided is the targeting of big industry by these groups. They will not target big industry because it's an extortion mechanism. So as long as big industry pays up and these guys do what they want big industry to do, it's a completely mutually beneficial alliance that is not going to, and their problem.
And that's an interesting, thing that Abhijit actually added to this discussion. I'd like to now go to the Indo-Pacific question. The reason being that it's the most, important geopolitical hotspot of the present day we live in, and we see that in India-China relations aren't good in any ways, especially post Galwan last year. India-Japan have issues. China-Japan has issues on the Senkaku Islands and the South China Sea, and then we have America that has that historically enjoyed that two ocean strategic advantage. Now that it's China versus
Miraj, you're breaking up. I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Am I audible? Yes.
I can't hear him as well.
I can't hear you, Miraj. You've just completely frozen.
Hold on. So when it comes to now the Indo-Pacific, that's an important issue that has came up. That's the hotspot of the world geopolitics today. We have China, having strained relations with most of the countries that claim to be important powers. I'd just like to have your views, Mr. Sushant Sareen, sir, on this. How is Indo-Pacific opening up strategically?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
How given the strategic division that has occurred into the world geopolitics, reason being that America has an issue, China has issues, the other world powers have issues. There is a lack of consensus or many issues. There may be consensus on other issues. I just want you to speak on this issue, that how is Indo-Pacific opening up? How are great powers wrapping themselves up against China in the Indo-Pacific?
I think I answered that earlier also. I don't think there's a whole lot of clarity on how this thing is going to play itself out. We don't know really. As of now, there is a pushback against China. But will there be ultimately an American compromise with the Chinese, an accommodation of China? Will there be a confrontation of China? We don't know. We don't know how the Russians are ultimately going to react. Right now, the Russians seem to be partly for their own reasons and partly because they have been pushed by Western bloody-mindedness into Chinese arms. But right now, the Russians seem to be almost entirely in the Chinese camp, right? But is that natural thing for the Russians to do? We don't know. In any case, the Russians remain a very potent military power, but where are they going economically, right? Where are they going demographically? There is a huge demographic crisis even in Russia. The European powers really have a very peripheral role to play in this region. I don't see them as being very important players right now. In any case, will they actually, even if supposing the Europeans were to come together and become part of the strategic contestation in Indo-Pacific, would they be ready to do it? To what extent would they be ready to do it? I don't know. You see greater spunk among some of the Central and East European powers than you see among the West European powers. Out of them also, the French, I would cast them in a different category. as a lot more credible than many of the other countries. So as of now, I think it is a very, very fluid situation. Even this G7 meeting, which has recently concluded, it pressed all the right buttons. But where is the framework? Where is the structure? Show me the money. Where is the money? Where is it going to come from? How are the finances going to work? How are how is this whole B3W thing going to be operationalized? Because that is one way in which Europe fits into a larger Indo-Pacific strategy.
And
So
Mr.
the
Abhijit,
whole B3W becomes a good fit for the Indo-Pacific. How will that happen? We don't know right now. So as of now, I'll plead ignorance on that.
Mr. Abhijit, I would like to hear on this specific question of Taiwan. Is it an open and shut case now for
On the specific question of
Taiwan?
Look, Taiwan, we're not going to help them. We're completely compromised by China. We're particularly scared of China. I've never understood why we're scared of China. I don't understand. When I go to Beijing, they tell me we never understand what you people are up to, because your army seems like it wants to wage war on us, but your foreign ministry is more loyal to us than our own foreign ministry is. So I don't know, why we keep talking up Taiwan, because we're doing nothing with Taiwan. We don't even have a proper intelligence sharing agreement with Taiwan. We're too scared to send, kids to learn Chinese to Taiwan. Any kind of official contact with Taiwan, we're so scared of. When China has absolutely no compunctions with regards to dealing with, Pakistan and people like that. So it's just one of those things. Why even talk about Taiwan? Because it could have been a factor, but it's not. So it's just a waste of time talking about Taiwan right now.
And
and there is another problem. You see, very often when we get very angry, we tend to say that, okay, fine, now we will talk about Taiwan and we will talk about Tibet and we will talk about XYZ. Frankly, that is not policy. That is knee-jerk, right? That is petulance. That is not policy. Policy would be that you actually have a policy on Taiwan, which you can then tweak, depending on what the Chinese are doing. You actually have a policy on Tibet. And unfortunately, this is the way we normally do things, that in our normal daily personal interactions. We've done this with the Pakistanis. We will talk about Balochistan to just finger the Pakistanis, when we have absolutely no intention of doing anything. So I don't think we should talk about these things until and unless we have a framework, a policy on how we want to use it. You can't use issues like this, as a debating point. These are not debating points. And the moment you use it as a debating point, you have not only lost the debate, but you have lost the plot. Unfortunately, that is what we have been doing both with Tibet, with Taiwan, on the Uyghur issue, and we've been doing it on our western borders as well.
And specifically, since Sushant Sareen has dealt with this Indo-Pacific largely, but I would like to have your take on this Quad issue. Can it ramp itself up? Are there future prospects, realistically speaking, Mr. Abhijit?
Future prospects for?
For Quad, is it like the world consensus and then Quad, emergence of the Quad as an arrangement?
Let's be clear about one thing. The Quad is actually a triad. Okay, Australia, Japan, and America don't need any exercises to be interoperable. They're extremely interoperable. All three of them can meet on any given day, and they'll know exactly what to do and operate with each other. The odd man out in this is India. Okay. Look at it in terms of economics, in terms of human resources, in terms of industrial resources, but very specifically with regards to military. You have a hodgepodge of half Russian equipment, half American equipment, half European equipment, none of which talk to each other. Well, the European and American can talk to each other perfectly. The rest really don't. And all you're realistically doing is, exercising with them. And from what we hear, those exercise, the knowledges gained from that exercise isn't even internalized and then spread out. It's just meant to be a nautanki that's carried out every year. So, get over the squad. It was always an economic improbability. Militarily, it's of extremely dubious this thing, except it's good to keep China on notice. The value of the quad is more in terms of signaling to China and only very marginal real military value. So don't put too much store in it. Be realistic.
Now that we are in the last phase of our discussion, but one important issue that has come up is the US withdrawal from the Afghanistan and the consequence, geopolitical concerns for the region and the world as a whole. Mr. Sushant Sareen, I'll just place one thing, that is in 1990, when USSR withdrew from Afghanistan, it left Najibullah with a dispensation. And there were lots of things, speculation that it will collapse, anarchy will overtake, it's inevitable that a civil war will break out. But the Najibullah could happily control the things for 2.5 years at least. Now that Ashraf Ghani is into the same box, he's into the same state, when US is withdrawing in September, what are the consequences that as a student of international relations, individually and on the behalf of all the students who are wearing this, that what are the consequences, geopolitical consequences of the US withdrawal from Afghanistan?
Yeah, when the Soviets withdrew, I think the Afghan army at that point of time was a far more robust army, if I might use the word, than what it is today. You did not see, the kind of collapse that we are seeing right now. And frankly, very often we try and look at the future with a look at the past. And we think that the past is going to repeat itself in the future. So if in the 90s, you had the Afghan army hold its own against the so-called Mujahideen for almost 2.5 years, and they finally kind of had to let go because the money and the weapons stopped coming. And that was partly because the Soviet Union had collapsed. So everybody right now is predicting that the current Afghan army will be able to do even better than what the Afghan army under Dr. Najibullah was able to do. But if you look at what is happening on the battlefield, it doesn't seem like that. Unfortunately, we have a habit of living in denial again on this issue. And people keep saying that, there will be a prolonged civil war, these people will be able to resist, the Taliban will not be able to win. I think we need to reevaluate all those assumptions and all those assertions that are being made. And I remember way back in 1996, I was at a seminar and there were some senior generals, mostly retired. In fact, all of them retired, and a former foreign secretary, a former home secretary, and these are not people who had retired many years back, just a few years back. Some of them were people who were supposed to have been Afghan experts. And in 1996, January or February, they were predicting that Kabul will not fall. They were predicting that the Najibullah government will be able to, Ahmad Shah Massoud and Burhanuddin Rabbani's government will be able to hold its own. And a couple of months later, it was all over. The Taliban actually did not even have to fight for Kabul. They just walked in because Ahmad Shah Massoud and his forces had vacated Kabul and moved up north. So we were living in our own cuckoo land. Ye to hoga hi nahi. So, this is one of the great, I don't know, mysteries of how we plan our future policy. So one is that. So I think the trajectory of war seems to be going in a certain direction, and there's no point denying it. Number two, I don't think that the Americans are going to be very unhappy or very perturbed, very bothered about, they're going to be very bothered about the Taliban coming to victory. I don't think all this talk about bases and all that is all nonsense. The bases in the Middle East are worth nothing to nobody. What kind of close-up air support will you do if you have to fly from Qatar after every 15 minutes? And how long can you loiter over a particular area where a battle is taking place? Maybe 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Abhijit is probably a bigger expert than me on these issues. He can tell you. How much can you loiter? How much can you... And if you could not control the battlefield while you were present in Afghanistan, how are you going to do it from sitting in Qatar or sitting on your, ships in the Arabian Sea? So I don't see that work. I don't see that possible. A base in Pakistan is not going to change the dynamics of the war in Afghanistan. So I think we have to be reconciled to the fact that Taliban are coming to power eventually, whether after a short war or, through a blitzkrieg action, which is happening right now. And then what will follow will follow. I think all those assumptions which people had made, that these are very nice guys, that these are very reformed people, these are not the Taliban of the 90s, these are people who will share power, these are people who will not carry out reprisals, these are people who will not carry out massacres, their attitude to women has changed, they will not harbor international terror groups. All of that bullshit is going to hit everybody like a ton of bricks. That is what is going to happen. After that, all those countries which played footsie with the Taliban, whether it was the Russians, whether it was the Pakistanis, whether it was the Chinese, whether it was the Iranians, they will all have a price to pay, as will we. So I think we need to be prepared for that.
Mr. Abhijit, you have been to Afghanistan. If I'm right, somewhere I have heard, listened from you on some other show. You closely have a watch over the issues on the ground. See, China, if there is an unstable Afghanistan, China has an issue with that because of Uyghurs and other Xinjiang issue. If Russia will allow instability in the Afghanistan to happen, or it will benefit, it's not going to work that way. It has Central Asian republics with which Russia has free visa regimes. And then
one second. Your basic presumption that there will be
exactly is wrong. China is interested in an unstable Afghanistan, as is Russia. Because remember, as long as Afghanistan remains unstable, it is a magnet both for jihadis and for American money.
That's where I'm coming. If there is an unstable Afghanistan...
So here's the issue. There is no interest in stability out there per se, except for the Americans maybe. For the Chinese and the Russians, it's the exact opposite. The Americans want a stable Afghanistan. The Chinese and Russians do not. Because remember, what happens to Pakistan's jihad waging capability after Afghanistan is stabilized? Then they have to be directed somewhere. Kashmir, yes, obviously, but then they are really worried about what happens to the Uyghuristan, Xinjiang province. And the Russians are worried what happens in Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and the Caucasus, especially Chechnya all over again. Right? We already seen that, there were Pakistanis fighting in the Pakistanis related to ISIS fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh in the Armenia-Azerbaijan. So there is no basic interest in stability out there. Number one. Number two, with regards to Taliban, see, the Taliban are extremely amorphous. We seem to think the issue isn't the Taliban. The issue is Pakistan's control of certain conservative leaders who are also Taliban. So when you're looking at, I don't care what the Taliban does in Afghanistan as long as they are not controlled by Pakistan. The issue is Pakistani control. And in order to do that, one, you have to keep supplying money and arms to the Afghans, number one. Number two, like what was happening with the last time Taliban took over, with active support from the Pakistani military, you have to control the Pakistani military. Now, or be willing to bomb it and call it out and name it and shame it. Now, the problem is exactly what Sushant said. Ultimately, the Taliban, which is to say, let's not call it the Taliban, ultimately Pakistani Taliban will take over. Why? Because after 6 to 7 years, America will get fed up of supplying money. America will have some other interest in engaging Pakistan or whatever. Huh?
6 to 7
months. Chalo, months. The Americans will want to re-engage Pakistan in something or the other. So it will now again be a strategic partner and all that gobbledygook. So nothing is happening with Afghanistan. It's just going to be same patterns repeating over and over again. The government, it depends. It's easier to make some kind of peace with some kind of Taliban. And please remember, Taliban are no kinder or more brutal than anybody else in Afghanistan is. It's pretty much the same. The mistake we make is that thinking that women walking around in short skirts equals progress and women walking around in burqa is not progress. Not the case. I would much rather have women in burqas walking around Kabul as long as India was safe rather than women in short skirts walking around in Kabul where India is not safe. So the issue for me isn't what happens in Afghanistan. They're an independent country. They manage their own affairs. My issue is what say does Pakistan get in Afghanistan? Right? Let's focus on that.
And Mr. Sushant, since India has now been holding talks with Taliban itself quite a month now that we came across through the news, what are the future prospects for the foreign policy of India vis-a-vis?
So that's what I just told you. That's the future prospects of Indian foreign policy. It will depend entirely on what America does. We don't have independent levers to play. And it mostly relies on forcing America to take action against the Pakistani military when they're trying to force certain outcomes in Kabul. Now, the issue is America isn't even willing to prevent the Pakistani military from killing its own troops there. They know Pakistanis are behind everything that is that has taken 2,000-3,000 American lives.
And they've let it happen.
And they've let it happen. You think they're going to be very concerned if Afghans are dying?
And Mr. Sushant, your last words, final words on.
Look, 1 second. I, frankly, as far as, and this is me personally, I have nothing but contempt for the Taliban. Okay, but if I was running the government of India, then I would argue that merely having contact or having dealings with somebody does not mean approving or giving recognition to their actions. These are two separate things. I can be doing business with somebody without necessarily approving everything that person stands for, right? I think we are moving into that mode, that we are opening a line of communication with them. It's not that we are going to whatever extent we are doing, we are going to give up our links with our friends, other friends in Afghanistan. But I think the interests of the state demand that you have a line of communication open. We have opened those. Can we actually do real business with the Taliban? I have my serious doubts because I think as of now, the Taliban are nothing but Pakistani proxies. Eventually, the Afghans will assert their independence. And if it is a Taliban dispensation, they will come into their own and they will exercise their independence. At that point of time, there will be a conflict between the Pakistanis and the Taliban. as soon as that conflict emerges, India will get an opening and India will go back to Afghanistan. Until then, maybe we will be watching what happens from the sidelines, because we have very little leverage, we have very little control, we have no real direct access. We either depend upon the Iranians or the Russians or the Central Asians to access Afghanistan. So we have very serious limitations, and we need to learn with some of those limitations. And I think that's the way it's going to play itself out.
I mean, this is the last thing that Mr. Sushant Sareen has actually expressed about U.S. withdrawal from the Afghanistan, the consequences. This is all from us today on the state of affairs. You have been Now, am I audible? Am I audible now? So this is the final thing. This is the final thing from the state of affairs today. We have possibly dealt with most of the things, be that India, China, be that Indo-Pacific. We have two important experts we had on the show, and I hope that you will drop us your feedback, especially the students of foreign policy, national security, and international politics. Thank you for coming to the show, Mr. Sushant Sareen, and thank you, Mr. Abhijit Iyer, for making entry to our session. It was seriously nice to hear both of you. I again will invite you some other day on with some different issue. So keep coming to our show. It's a great contribution from people like you, from a small initiative from us. So thank you for coming. It was a nice to have you both on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you.